and thank you for coming down on such short notice. What we've seen today is a sad day for New Jersey. The documents that have been published are both shocking and outrageous. They show government at its worst. Among other things, they call into serious question the honesty of this governor and his staff. As a result of what has been revealed today, this governor has a lot of explaining to do. So many questions remain unanswered. That's why I subpoenaed Mr. Wildstein to testify, and that's why I hope he will come and testify tomorrow at noon in this building. So far, what we know is that Mr. Wildstein has been pointed to by everybody, the governor, the executive director, as the fall guy. But when we look at the documents we've seen today, it is clear that that's not the entire story. Mr. Wildstein's testimony can help fill in the blanks and answer a lot of questions. I'd like to thank Speaker Sheila Oliver for her support in supporting the committee and having subpoena authority. And I'd also like to thank Speaker-elect Vincent Prieto, who said today that he fully expects the investigation to continue. But as I've said time and time again, as this investigation has unwound, that we still have much more to learn. The committee will continue to work to get these answers. With that, I'd be happy to take your questions. Yes, David.
John, from what you've seen in these correspondences, what does it look like to you was the role of Governor Christie in all of this?
I've not seen any emails that have the governor's name on it, but clearly there's an email that has the governor's deputy chief of staff on it. This is an administration that keeps a very tight control over what happens and what comes out of the front office. And so we'd like to get explanations as to who else in the governor's office knew about this and what their role was. Yes?
Assemblyman, you mentioned you hope that Mr. Wildstein appears tomorrow. Have you had any correspondence, whether him or his legal representation, ever shed some light on whether or not he will be there tomorrow?
Some of you may know this, some of you may not. Mr. Wildstein's attorney filed an order to show cause today to quash the subpoena. That's returnable tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. or 9:15 a.m. here in Mercer County. And they're making the argument that, well, you'll read the pleadings and the arguments are the arguments. We don't believe there's any basis for the court to give any relief. Matt.
So the governor said that his senior staff, he asked the senior staff and they knew nothing about this. Do we now know that's untrue and therefore he either lied to the public or his people lied to him?
Well, there's two possibilities. I mean, either he doesn't know what's going on in his front office or that there's lying going on. Yes?
Have you heard from the governor today on this?
He has not called me today.
John,
Yes?
can you foresee the possibility of issuing subpoenas to his deputy chief of staff? And would you go so far as to, if you don't get all the answers you want, or if you see other indications of perhaps a smoking gun, could you actually subpoena the governor himself? Do you have that power?
Well, we have the power under the legislative authorization to subpoena any person, any entity before the committee to answer questions on this topic. As Speaker-elect Prieto has said, he expects the investigation to continue. And in the new legislative session, we're going to have to get answers to the questions that have been put at our feet today. What was Bridget Kelly's involvement? What was Mr. Stepion's involvement? What was Mr. Druniak's involvement? You see the name of Charlie McKenna. You see the name of Maria Camella. You see lots of names of the governor's front office staff in these emails. It would not be an appropriate conclusion. It would not be an appropriate way to get answers to assume that they had nothing to do with it. Clearly, they're in the email chain. We need to ask questions. We're going to start those questions tomorrow with Mr. Wildstein, but as has been clear throughout this entire process, as we ask one question, as we get one set of documents, 10 more questions unfold. And so we're going to continue to look at this until we get answers to all the questions.
Would you, can I follow up?
Sure, follow up.
If you felt it was necessary and fruitful, would you subpoena the governor himself?
We're going to look at every person who has a role right now, we don't have any document that points to the governor. And so I want to be clear. If we have documents that point to an individual and we need to ask questions, it's my intention for this committee to ask those questions of that person. Right now, we don't have that, and so I'm not going to go there. But clearly, there's a reason to ask questions of Bridget Kelly and other people in the governor's office, and I expect the committee to pursue that after we're done with Mr. Wildstein. Yes?
Do you know of any, or can you foresee any criminal investigation into the issues here?
Well, as you all recall, the email that Pat Foy sent, Executive Director of the Port Authority, on September 13, said that federal and state laws were broken here. Some of the federal laws that were broken were the Bridge Act. We're looking into what state laws were broken. I know that Senator Lesniak today called for there to be a federal investigation, a prosecutorial investigation of this. And so I think that the law enforcement entities are going to have to look at what took place here and make a decision for themselves as to whether laws were broken. Angie?
What can you say definitively at this point about the involvement of Bill Stepien and the Christie campaign and all of this?
Well, clearly, there are several phases to this. There's the initial phase that started in August of 2013 that, I guess, ended with the email that it's time to make traffic in Fort Lee. Then there's all of the actions afterwards, which, in my opinion, amount to a cover-up, an effort to justify what took place here, an effort to diminish the seriousness of what took place here. And so that part we have to continue to look at.
Did you just say that it's up to the law enforcement agencies whether to launch a criminal investigation or not?
Well, yeah,
It's up to them.
the prosecutor's
You're not
office.
calling for it, you're-
Well, I think
you're
that,
not
I
saying
think
hold off.
the committee has its work to do. They have the work to do. Don't forget, the legislative committee's function here ultimately is we want to make sure that the Port Authority is accountable, that this agency can't be abused in the fashion that it's clearly been abused. And so we need to get answers to questions so that we can fix the Port Authority. That's a separate mission from what law enforcement agencies may do. If their law has been broken, that's their province, and they're certainly, and they should, and I would encourage them to look at this, because it seems to me that at least some laws have been broken. I don't know if what level of criminality they may rise to or whether they're civil offenses, but clearly it's something that they should look into. Yes?
Just as a point of clarification, in what appears to be text messages, someone texts, "I feel badly about the kids, I guess."
Yeah.
And then there's a reply, "They are the children of Buono voters." Do we know who these texts are from and to?
Well, it appears that at least part of those text messages seem to be either from or to Mr. Wildstein. But not entirely certain who the other person is, although it seems like a bulk of the communications are between Wildstein and Bridget Kelly. No matter who they're between, to have that type of crass indifference to what's happening to folks in Fort Lee is sickening and inappropriate for anybody holding high government position.
And I just have one
you
follow-up.
face
Yeah.
As far as
I'm
email-
sorry.
I'm sorry. The only email directly from Bridget Kelly in the governor's office is the one saying time for the traffic in Fort Lee.
No, there are other emails. That's the kickoff, if you will.
Okay.
The email from Bridget Kelly to David Wildstein saying it's time for traffic in Fort Lee, and his two-word response, "Got it." But then there are emails after that that more go into the after-action operation to conceal or minimize or change the complexion of what took place.
Is it agency, Port Authority employees who are not connected to Wildstein who are pulling these emails off of their servers there? Or is it Wildstein himself who says, here's everything I have, and he implicates himself?
We have issued subpoenas to Mr. Wildstein, to Mr. Baroni, to Mr. Foy, Mr. Fulton, Durando, Captain Licorice, and to the Port Authority itself. And so there's overlap. I can't say specifically what email came from, but it's clear that a bulk of the emails that we're looking at that seem to point to the origins of this caper go back to Mr. Wildstein and Ms. Kelly.
In your opening comments, you had mentioned, I believe, that this is shocking, outrageous, it's a sad day for New Jersey.
It is.
Can you explain why?
Well, look, government does not exist so that political operatives can punish mayors or communities. And that's what happened here, is that there was some reason that they felt it was necessary to inflict some measure of retribution or punishment either on Fort Lee or the mayor of Fort Lee, and they seemed gleeful about it. They seemed somewhat pleased with themselves in having been able to carry it out. And then they went through great lengths to try to justify in terms that they tried to sugarcoat it as some type of study or some type of traffic analysis, when in fact it really comes to be a political operation. When you see the words that somebody was worried about the children being late for school, and then the response is, well, don't worry about it, they're probably children of Buono voters. I mean, that's not what you expect to see in any Port Authority operation, any government operation, and it really points to the political nature of what took place here as opposed to some governmental operation, as Bill Baroni tried to represent it as when he came in. Laura?
There is an enormous number of the texts that are redacted, that are blacked out. Have you been given an explanation why that's the case, and can you get that information that's
We've been given no explanation on why those redactions, or at least in some of the documents. To be specific, we received documents from Mr. Baroni. We received an explanation in the cover letter from his attorney as to redactions on certain pages. Mr. Wildstein's submissions included an enormous number of redactions and no explanation as to why those redactions are there, whether they're claiming privilege, whether they're saying that they're not related. But again, it strains credibility because when you look at the context of a string of text messages or a string of emails, to say that the first, the third, and the fifth are the ones you should see, but the second and the fourth are somehow not related, it's just not believable. And so we have questions as to why there are redactions, what the basis of the redactions. We've asked his attorney for that. We have not gotten a response.
Senator,
Yes.
you indicated that there may be a cover-up here. By whom?
Well, that's what we're trying to find out. But clearly, when somebody sends an email, it's time for traffic problems in Fort Lee on August 13th. And on September 9th, there are traffic problems. And we have to put that in the context that Mayor Sokolich himself said he met with or spoke with Mr. Baroni in 2010 to say that on a good day, Fort Lee has horrible traffic problems in the bridge. So when you see that, and then you see the political commentary about the impact of the traffic problems that they created, and then you see the lengths they've gone through to try to create a justification for it, it becomes very clear that there was no valid governmental reason and that they spent a great deal of effort trying to find a reason to justify it. That spells cover-up to me.
Assemblyman,
Luke.
The Port Authority is an agency unlike any other, not just in this area, but perhaps in the whole country.
Right.
If an agency of that size and power can be used as a political weapon, as you've alleged happened here,
Sure.
why should the people of New Jersey have faith that any part of their government couldn't be used?
Well, that's what I said. It's a sad day for New Jersey, because every time something like this happens, it gives ordinary citizens who want to have faith that government is there to serve them and do the right thing, justifiable cynicism. That when they see things like this happen, when they see the chief executive of the state get up and say, no one in my office had anything to do with this, and then we see emails from folks in his office, it gives them a justifiable reason to be cynical, and that hurts all of us who want to try to make government work to help people.
Senator,
Yes?
Can you give me a sense of what's in the rest of the documents? Are they similarly troubling? Are there other things that are coming out about this?
Well, one of the things is, there's a lot of repetition in the documents. There's, for instance, there's Mr. Baroni's text that he delivered in front of the Transportation Committee on November 25th, and there's somebody's markup of it, and that appears 2 or 3 times in the documents. There's a couple of PowerPoints that are repeated throughout the documents. Some of the emails and some of the text messages you see several times. And so I'm not sure if that's because they just want to try to bury documents. I'm not sure if they weren't aware of what they were giving us. But clearly, there's gaps. As I said, the August 13th email, for instance, which seems to be the kickoff point. A terse message from Bridget Kelly to David Wildstein, it's time for traffic problems in Fort Lee. Now, if you were to get that and never have had a conversation before, you'd have to ask, well, what's this mean? But clearly, the immediate response was got it. So there has to have been communications before that of some nature in which he knew what traffic problems in Fort Lee meant, and she knew that he would know that. We don't have all those conversations, and so that's why we need to continue to ask the questions we're asking and potentially subpoena other people and subpoena other documents. Yes?
How do you interpret the silence out of the governor's office today? What do you think that means?
Well, I think that, as they have in the past, I think they're trying to come up with a plausible explanation for what's been uncovered today.
If Bridget Kelly and Bill Stepien, say, resign their positions or resign the positions that they're appointed for example, would that make you feel any better? What would that
Well, no one's resignation makes me feel better. And we've seen this movie before where the initial allegations about this being political resulted in the resignations of both Wildstein and Baroni. Their resignations don't answer questions, perhaps provide some measure of cover for the governor's office or for the administration to say, we've addressed the problem. But what we really need to understand is how this agency is. Everybody needs to understand this agency is bigger in size than 26 U.S. states. It has a budget bigger than 26 U.S. states. Could operate in such a fashion that its entire apparatus is utilized for political purposes. It raises legitimate questions by myself and other members of the legislature. If this could happen at the Port Authority, how else has government been abused for the political advantage of the governor in other agencies? Has the Division of Revenue been utilized improperly? Has the Department of Community Affairs been utilized improperly? And so, the questions go on and on because we've had very strenuous, steadfast denials by the administration that they had nothing to do with this. And yet we see that at least several people in his administration were either aware of it at the beginning or were involved in the efforts to try to mollify people's opinions of it. And so that leads to a natural question, what else have they been involved with? There's been lots of speculation from the time Chris Christie was U.S. Attorney that he misused his office, used it inappropriately. There have been allegations since the time he's been governor that he's misused his office and used it inappropriately to punish people. This is the first time we've seen evidence, and so it begs the question, what else is out there that we don't know?
John,
Yes.
there's an analogy that goes back 4 decades. Has the term smoking gun entered your mind at all when you digested all of this material?
Well, I think that the email between Bridget Kelly and David Wildstein comes close to that definition. Up to this point in time, there's been no direct connection to the governor's front office, and now there's a direct connection. And so now we need to see where that direction goes. There may be other similar documents that we have not yet uncovered, and we need to. But as I said before, every time we seem to get an answer to a question, it legitimately raises several more questions that then we need answers to. And we're going to continue to pursue this in a methodical fashion until we get the answers we need so the legislature could respond appropriately to what really is a misuse of a public agency.
John, so going back to the question about what else is in the documents, have we seen everything salient at this point, or you have anything you're holding back for tomorrow?
I don't know if you've seen everything salient because I don't know what you've seen. So there are, well, I will tell you that there are somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 pages of documents. And they are documents that, when you look at page 1, it means nothing to you. And then you get to page 2,000 and you see something and you go back and say, well, wait a minute, I think I saw something like this at page 1. And so it's a puzzle that continues to be put together. There are things that I saw last night in my umpteenth review of the documents that I hadn't seen the first time. And so that's why this continues to be reviewed, and that's why we continue to ask questions, because there are things that at first blush may not seem relevant. I mean, there's an email that I've seen that says, we've seen the denials by the administration saying that, for goodness sake, the governor does not get involved in traffic studies. I think we're all aware of that quote. And then there's an email in there saying the governor has approved the traffic study for Springfield, and he has authorized $60,000. So, the question is, well, does the governor really not get involved with traffic studies, or does the governor get involved with traffic studies? And that's something that, when you first looked at it, it probably didn't rise to the surface as being relevant because there were so many other things to look at. And so, to answer your question, is there more? There probably is. And we're going to have to continue to look at them as we go through this. My colleague, The Senate Majority Leader, Loretta Weinberg, has joined us. She got delayed in traffic on the turnpike. And
I don't think it was purposeful.
but I did want to give the Majority Leader an opportunity to say a few words. Majority Leader, why don't you come on up? You need this.
Thanks. Thanks for the stool so I can see over the microphones. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, a moment I would like to thank my colleague, who now I am the same height that he is, Assemblyman John Wisniewski, for picking up where I left off in terms of this whole Port Authority saga. I started with this in mid-September when I first heard about it. And I wrote a letter, actually, to one of our Port Authority commissioners, Commissioner Pat Schuber, who was a former county executive in Bergen County, and I thought would understand the issue around using the busiest bridge in the world to somehow, the implication that that busiest bridge in the world was used for some kind of petty political payback. And upon receiving my letter, Commissioner Schuber called me and said, I will get to the bottom of this. Well, I'm still waiting. I have not heard one word from one Port Authority commissioner. I attended meetings of the Port Authority in October, in November, and in December, and asked all of these questions. As of this moment, as far as I know, we've received no answer from the people who are supposed to be in charge of this bi-state agency that some have described as the 51st state. So, at a moment, without filtering too much, I threatened them with a subpoena if they didn't answer. And I drafted a bill and dropped it into the Senate to give subpoena power. When at the second meeting I went to, my friend, Assemblyman John Wisniewski, accompanied us to that second meeting and pointed out to me, we already have subpoena power, which derived out of, I guess, the toll increases. So I said, well, then go ahead and use it, because it would be much quicker than my trying to get this through the Senate. And under his able leadership, and with the power of subpoena, we got to today. And as much as I knew about this subject, as much as I've read about it, as I've delved into it, as I've talked to people, today actually shocked me. It really did, and I thought I was beyond that. I have, up until this moment, said the biggest problem is that the governor has created an atmosphere at the Port Authority that enabled people like David Wildstein to believe that he could just do this, and then enabled people like Bill Baroni, with whom I served in the state Senate, to come forth with a made-up cover-up. And then I find out that the governor has actually created that atmosphere in his own office, where people who report to him think it's okay to say, let's create some traffic in Fort Lee. To me, as I said, this is still a little shocking. And I am waiting, and hopefully with the leadership of Assemblyman Wisniewski, that this subpoena power will continue, and that eventually, hopefully sooner rather than later, it's been 4 months, sooner rather than later, we will hear the whole story of who knew what when, and it will be the end of this kind of an atmosphere in the state of New Jersey. To think that the mayor of one of the communities that I represent has been referred to in, it's hard to tell by words in an email whether they're meant to be demeaning, but to think up, he happens to be of Croatian background, by the way, and he's referred to in the emails as the Serbian, representing Serbia Well, maybe that's the way they look at government. But where I come from, Fort Lee is a democracy, Bergen County is a democracy, and so is New Jersey. Thank you.
Yes.
As your investigation has continued, have you or anyone else received pressure or retaliation from Christie's administration?
I have not received, I'm not aware of any retaliation yet, anyway.
Have you heard from your counterparts in the New York State Legislature today about this?
I haven't heard from anyone in the New York Legislature today. I am aware that they are interested in this issue and have similar concerns as I do about the Port Authority and how it's utilized and apparently utilized for ill.
Senator?
Yes.
By the way, let me answer that question. We, in the past, in my office, yeah. I'm sorry, I'll have to stay up in the stool. We, in my office, had heard from some New York legislators who I believe sent a letter a month or so ago, I guess, to the Port Authority, asking for some additional information. We thought they might attend a Port Authority meeting, but didn't. But there were some New York legislators interested in this.
Senator, a couple of weeks ago, Governor Christie quoted you as saying, even Loretta Weinberg says, I'm not directly involved in this, and he made a point of mentioning that. Based on this new information that's come out now, do you still feel that way? What do you feel the governor's involvement might be, and is this going to hurt the relationship with the Democratic majority working with this governor, do you think?
Well, I think the governor's going to have to answer those questions. Yes, I've said all along, I do not believe the governor called the Port Authority and said close some lanes. But I did say I held him responsible for the atmosphere. Now, finding that that atmosphere existed in his own office is what I find really troubling. If somebody raises the issue in the emails, I feel sorry for the kids. Remember, this was the first and second day of school. Right. So you have parents driving their children to kindergarten or first grade for the first time, stuck in traffic jams, late for school. And it was like, these are children of Buono voters? I have to say, who are these people? Who are these people who are in charge of our Port Authority and our front office? Who are these people who have this kind of a mindset?
Senator, you just said you believed all along that Governor Christie really didn't have anything to do with it.
No, I said I did not believe that the governor called the Port Authority and told them to close lanes.
You believe he told, that it's possible that he told somebody?
Well, let me put it to you this way. The governor made a statement that he asked people in his office if they knew anything about this. And according to what I read, he said none of them did. So either his staff lied to him or the governor was less than truthful with the people of New Jersey.
You have a governor who was elected on a platform of transparency, and here you have his appointees referring to discussions held in parking lots on the matter, using personal email accounts. Is there any way the governor can, in your eyes, restore his credibility on this or any other issue?
I'm not sure that he had a lot of credibility on the issue to begin with, but clearly any credibility he had has been totally eliminated by these revelations. You have his highest ranking appointees. I mean, you don't get to be the Deputy Executive Director of the Port Authority by being an insignificant political figure in the state. His second highest appointee there. Now his Deputy Chief of Staff, 3 chairs or 4 chairs away from the governor's office. Other people who were involved in his campaign and his communication shop, all involved either before, during, or after. A governor who has steadfastly first joked about it, derided this, and now has been, in a sense, has got to come clean and say what he knew and when he knew it, because the statement that I've asked everybody in my shop and they don't know anything about it, as I said earlier, I mean, either he has no control over his front office or he's not telling the truth. Either way, it doesn't bode well for this governor.
What kind of response are you looking from the front office at this point?
Well, that's up to them to make a response, but we still have our work cut out for us. We need to speak with David Wildstein tomorrow. We need to call in Bridget Kelly. We need to call in others.
Baroni?
I'm sorry?
Baroni?
Baroni's on the list. I mean, one of the problems, Michael, we have with this is that the list keeps getting bigger because we keep getting more questions. And so, you know, when this first started out, it seemed like an issue that involved simply Baroni and Wildstein. At least that's the impression that was portrayed to the committee on the November 25th hearing. And as we've dug deeper and deeper into this, it seems more and more evident that there are others involved. And so the list of people that we want to speak to and ask questions of has grown. And on that list, obviously, is Wildstein. On that list now is Bridget Kelly. And always on that list has been Bill Baroni. Mike?
There's a reference in one of the, I think it was a Wildstein email, to have David Sampson was going to help with the retaliation. Do you have any indication that Sampson did anything?
Well, there are a number of references to former Attorney General Sampson throughout all of the documents that have been supplied to the committee as part of its investigation. Emails that express outrage at Executive Director Foy, emails that express a desire to settle the score, if you will, and the emails that you refer to. And so again, the list grows longer and longer of people that we should speak with and ask questions of. There are a number of things that are in the documents that may or may not be instructive. There's an email chain that seems to go nowhere that talks about a meeting between the governor and General Sampson on August 8th, several days before the August 13th email. Does that meeting have anything to do with the email that was sent on August 13th? We'd like to know.
Are you considering a subpoena of former Attorney General Sampson?
He would be somebody on the list. As I said, the list is quite extensive, and I'm trying to approach it with the committee's support in a methodical basis to try to go piece by piece. And so there are lots of names that show up in the emails that we would potentially want to get to, but I think there are people we need to get to first.
Is he one of the first ones?
Well, I think Wildstein's one of the first ones. I think right after that, Bridget Kelly is one of the first ones. And then we need to see where that testimony goes in the documents we get from Bridget Kelly as to where the investigation goes next. And so it's hard to tell you, to give you a batting order, so to speak. I could just tell you that there are a number of individuals. That's one name that's certainly under consideration. And we're going to follow this through methodically, step by step, and follow it where it goes.
You said you have a lot of questions that need to be answered. Can you talk about some of the questions you plan to pose to Mr. Wildstein tomorrow, and also some of the answers that you're going to get?
Yeah, well, I hope to get the truth. Whatever the answer is, I hope to get the truth. So, as I said earlier, you have this August 13th email, which says it's time to cause traffic in Fort Lee. The way I read that email, I mean, unless you've had a conversation beforehand, you'd be hard-pressed to really understand what that means. And so I'd like to know about what happened beforehand. Was there a meeting? Who was at that meeting? What was decided? Why was it decided? What happened after that? Because you've got the email on August 13th saying it's time to create traffic problems. You've got the response, got it. And then what you really see is you see some communications on 28th, 29th of August, and then you see the Friday before some emails before the closures, and then you see lots of emails that 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th in which there are commentary about what's taking place and then discussion about what to do. Clearly, Mayor Sokolich's pleas were ignored. Why were they ignored? The statement was made to us by Mr. Baroni at the committee hearing on the 25th that no one was told so as to not interfere with the authenticity of the data collected. Well, even if that's true, why wouldn't you tell the executive director? He's not going to interfere with the authenticity of the data. So the answers we've been given don't wash in many respects, and so we need to ask questions about those answers. We've gotten documents from some people, emails and other communications, and we've asked for similar documents from other people, and one person provides a document with both names in it, the other person doesn't. So why did one person provide the document and not the other? I mean, that's a legitimate question because it really goes to the fundamental authority of the committee. Are they in contempt of complying with the subpoena because they haven't provided the documents we've asked for? The list of questions is, very long, and the answers, is all I want is the truth.
John?
Yes, Angie.
You said that there were some score settling emails by David Sampson. Can you explain what you found in
Well,
those?
there was clearly quite a bit of anger about Mr. Foy, his September 13th email. And there was, and I don't want to quote them because I don't have them in front of me and I don't want to say the wrong thing, but clearly there were email traffic back and forth, basically, who does he think he is? We'll show him. Again, not a very professional demeanor. Shows an absolute absence of any collegiality in that organization. You can almost describe the Port Authority's culture as that of Hatfields and McCoy, because you've got the New York side and the New Jersey side, and there seems to be a great deal of animus and lack of sharing of information between the two. An agency this big, that shouldn't happen.
So, John,
Yes, Luke.
there is a reference in the communication about some of this taking place so close to an election. I know that State Senator Buono has fielded a number of questions today on this incident. How do you think New Jersey voters would have reacted had this come out before the election?
I don't know. But I do think that it fundamentally shows a different character of this administration than the administration tried to portray itself as. It shows an administration that spends a lot of time covering its tracks. It shows an administration that spends a lot of time with a very callous disregard of the impact of its decisions on ordinary citizens. And so I've got to believe that voters would have taken that into consideration. Whether it would have made a difference, I don't know.
Sure, if I can follow up on that.
Let me add something
sure.
here. And I go back to it, maybe because that's more my firsthand information about this. Not one Port Authority commissioner, whether you're talking about the chairperson or any other member, all of whom I vote on as a member of the Judiciary Committee and member of the State Senate, not one of them has issued one statement up until this moment. Nothing. I went to meetings, they all looked at me, everybody said hello when I came in and goodbye when I left. Not one of them has said, I want to get to the bottom of this. We're looking at it. There are no heroes in this saga. And though the executive director, Pat Foy, did reverse it, he's the one who gave the testimony under oath. Well, you don't forget, David Wildstein was originally allowed to stay till December 31st with kind words from the governor's office. According to the emails, he himself got to approve before they were released. He said, Patrick Foy, well, I would have fired him, but he wasn't my employee. Well, whose employee was he? Do we, as we said, have two separate port authorities here, which is why we are passing a joint resolution asking Congress to actually look into the law that creates the Port Authority. It's time to update it. Transparency. This governor vetoed the bill we passed in the Assembly and the Senate requiring more transparency at the Port Authority. He vetoed it.
Yes.
I think the emails definitively show that Mr. Sokolich was being punished for not endorsing Governor Christie. And what do you think about Mayor Fulop's name?
Do I think that it definitively proves it? Probably not, but I think it really eliminates any other plausible explanation. When you have people talking about time to create traffic, you have people talking about Buono voters, you have somebody talking about smiling as a consequence of the traffic jam, you have, when reporters were calling, asking questions about this, you have terse one-word, four-letter word responses about that inquiry from somebody from the press. They weren't happy about the questions from the press. They weren't even happy about Senator Weinberg and myself coming to the Port Authority meeting. There's one email that talks about, they have a press gaggle that they call after the Port Authority meeting, and the email says, can we keep Weinberg and Wiz out of the gaggle? And so this was an operation that was going through great lengths to try to put a clamp on the information that was going out. And let me not miss this point, that there are still outstanding unanswered subpoenas that the committee has issued with regard to the toll increases. There are unanswered FOIA, Federal Freedom of Information Act requests that the Port Authority hasn't answered. This is an agency that, and many of you have filed those FOIA requests and gotten no response. This is an agency that has long acted like it's above the law, and in this particular case, we have documentary evidence that they did act above the law. Yes?
So when you go into the Port Authority lobby, there's two portraits hanging there. One is Governor Christie, one is Governor Andrew Cuomo. Governor Christie is a Republican who says he works with Democrats. Governor Cuomo is a Democrat who says he works with Republicans. And yet you have this atmosphere at the Port Authority. Given what we've seen in these documents, to what extent should, and it's my impression that the governor of New Jersey's running of the Port Authority was not much of an issue in campaign 2013. We have campaign 2014 in New York. To what extent do you think the voters of New York should judge Governor Cuomo on how the Port Authority is being run when he's one of the two guys who owns it?
Well, one of the disadvantages we all have is that it's an agency that is really cleft in two. And so we've been looking at essentially the Jersey side of the organization. The only contact we had was with Patrick Foy, the executive director, who hails from the New York side. But I don't know whether the same culture exists with regard to the New York appointees. I don't know if the same issues exist. But I know that the New York legislature has now become equally concerned with the Port Authority and will begin, I expect, begin looking into it in the same fashion that we have. And my hope is that we could work with our colleagues in New York. This is a bi-state agency, requires laws from both states. Let's come up with a law that both states can agree on that reforms this agency, provides a greater degree of accountability than exists now, and scales it back. Because while the transportation mission of this agency is very important, there's so many other missions they have that I can't really begin to understand why we need a governmental entity to run a real estate enterprise. Yes.
Two quick questions on Mayor Sokolich, who's been remarkably quiet when I call by reporters.
Sure.
I know one for some of you know. I was Lucy. I didn't intend to call him as a witness to see who approached him about endorsing being a governor, and for Senator Weinberg. I think you've suggested that if Ford V is awaiting a traffic study of some sort or new lights that would be coming from the New Jersey Department of Transportation, and that he may be concerned if he speaks out, the DOT will eliminate the funding for that project. Is that
I've had many conversations with Mayor Sokolich. He is the head of one of the communities I represent, a community, in fact, that I lived in at one point. And I think he was concerned, remains concerned, that somehow the residents of Fort Lee will be punished for whatever is perceived as his bad behavior in the Christie administration, whatever definition that is. And you know what? We have example after example of how people do get punished. So I think his fear is based upon a little bit of the reality that he's seen.
And just to your question about having Mayor Sokolich come in, he's also one of the individuals that we would love to come in and have testify. As a matter of fact, one of the individuals that we had planned on calling tomorrow initially had been Mayor Sokolich, had been his police chief. But then, as I said, then you get the documents and you see that the questions that you would ask him are suddenly become smaller questions in terms of the overall scope of this than the questions you would ask Mr. Wildstein. And so the focus tends to shift a bit based on the documents we get and the questions we need to ask. We will, at some point in time, have Mayor Sokolich come in because we need to ask him questions about the meeting he had in 2010 with Bill Baroni, where he expressed a concern about traffic, and then mysteriously 3 years later he's got a traffic jam in his town. We need to know about that. We need to know what was happening politically, that he suddenly feels like he's being punished for something. Were there actions that he took? Did he make an endorsement? Did he fail to make an endorsement? Did he attend an event? Did he not attend an event that somehow either irritated or made somebody happy that resulted in what we see as essentially punitive behavior by the Port Authority against Fort Lee. So yes, he is one of the people we're going to call, and we've got a lot of questions to ask him.
John, you mentioned before that there were some discrepancies in documents on varying subpoenas. You subpoena one, you get documents, subpoena other, you don't get the other side. Do you get any examples of that? Who specifically may be contempt of it?
Well, I think that there's certainly there's a gap between the documents provided by Mr. Wildstein and the documents provided by Mr. Baroni. They're both on the same email chains, and so you get emails from one, but you don't get the same emails from another. It really begs the question as to why aren't they included? And we'd love to have them come in, and again, that's one of the questions we had asked Mr. Baroni when he comes in. Why are these documents missing? Why weren't they provided?
So, Mr. Baroni's are less extensive than Wildstein's?
Well, I will say conclusively that there are things that I would have expected to see in the Baroni response that I don't see. But it's probably equally true, or could be equally true, that if I looked in the reverse direction, there may be things that are in the Baroni responses that I don't see in the Wildstein. But there's a lot of pages here. And if you've ever looked at a printout of an email communication, you get this conversation and then they print the next one, but it has all the other ones. And so you got to match up a lot of stuff. And so it's very, very fine work, and the committee staff continues to go through it. And we're going to continue to glean more information from it as we go on. But that's at least a broad example of what I've noticed. I've got time for 2 more questions. Matt.
The documents that were released or that were out there today, were those all from Wildstein, or were those
I don't know. What did you get?
There's the same packet of documents that have
the committees received documents from Wildstein, Baroni, Foy, Durando, Fulton, Licorice, and then from the Port Authority itself.
The ones that have been publicly discussed today could be a mixture of...
It could be a mixture. I really can't say because I don't know what you're looking at. Yes?
You both were critical of the governor's decision to cancel the ARC tunnel. Do you see parallels between that decision and this project?
Well, I think this is a governor who tries to put a clamp on information that is not favorable. We saw in our attempts to get behind the veil, if you will, on the decision to cancel the ARC tunnel, a resistance to provide information. There are a lot of reasons to question that decision. The money that was allocated for the ARC tunnel has now gone to fill the Transportation Trust Fund. And while one could say that's great, there are still people working. The fact of the matter is that money was intended for a tunnel, not for the Transportation Trust Fund. And the governor has continues to fail to address the lack of funding for the trust fund. And so there are a lot of strings that come out of this that need to be examined. But I think the biggest issue here is this is the first time we've seen this administration misuse the authority they've been given for what appears to be no practical governmental reason. And so the question that I have, that Senator Weinberg has, that other members of the legislature have, is what else has happened that we haven't found out? What else is going on that we don't know about? Because they seem to have a very strong and capable operation involved in covering their tracks. One more question.
I do intend to call Mr. Stepien and Mr. Juniak. And is it reasonable to think that the governor would not be aware of what Mr. Stepien and Mr. Juniak were aware of, whatever they were aware of?
Those were names that I had mentioned earlier as potential targets of additional subpoenas. If we all understand how this front office operates, it's a very tightly run operation. It certainly begs my credibility to think that there are people in the front office who are doing things that the governor is not aware of. Thank you all very much. Got off your perch?